There we go. Hello, everyone. It's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So, guys, with me tonight, I have Lauren Steiner. We were supposed to be here at 5, and that was my fault. I got my time wrong. I said 5. It was supposed to be 6. That was totally on me. But she is here, activist, blogger, at this point, YouTuber. She's moved on to YouTube. Laura, please give everyone a hello to the soapbox.
Hello, Jamal. Thank you so much for having me on.
No, I appreciate you coming on. I've done multiple shows where I've either used an interview that you've done. I think I used the Cenk Uygur interview. There was another show I did recently talking about the DNC. It's funny. I call it the secret plot within the DNC because that's effectively the way I come across. I read it. It was almost like this kind of militarist activity of resistance inside the DNC. And I read it with a smile on my face thinking, oh my God, this was so awesome. Yeah, like I said, I've watched you from afar from this, and I'm glad that you could come onto the show. I think this is going to be an interesting conversation about the current state of politics, about activism itself, and whether or not activism has capacity to actually make changes. And even just you and your character arc in this particular, this area of either politics, activism, and to some degree at this point, media, if that makes sense. So How did you start in all this? What was your origins for this?
Well, I mean, not to get into my whole history, because I'm probably 30 years older than you are, but I wanted to be a broadcast journalist back in high school. And everything I did was to prepare for that. I was a history major because I didn't want to study communications, because I thought, I was already a good writer. I could learn how to use a camera and edit video in an internship. But I thought it was important to understand history, because of that famous George Santayana quote, those who don't understand history are condemned to repeat it.
Yes, yeah.
So I studied history and political science and economics, et cetera, et cetera. And at the time I graduated college, which was the end of the 70s, there was this new thing called cable TV. And I just fell into public access cable TV, because when I found out what it was, that citizens could make their own media without having it be mediated through some writer, reporter, editor, producer, I just said, this is the greatest thing to happen to free speech since the First Amendment. I'm in. And when I was 24 years old, I was running my own public access cable channel in Lexington, Massachusetts, which is a very, very liberal community, the home of Jill Stein, the home of Noam Chomsky. And fast forward, I worked for A&E Networks in sales and marketing. That got me out to California. In the 90s, I got married, had 2 boys, was a stay-at-home mom, doing all sorts of yuppie shit, was not very political. The only thing I remember about the 90s was, why do I agree with these 2 right-wingers, Pat Buchanan and Ross Perot, about NAFTA? And it turns out years later, when I was protesting the TPP, I realized why I agreed with them. I got back into politics after George Bush started making noises about invading Iraq, and got involved with Progressive Democrats of Los Angeles. And I was doing, producing and hosting a bunch of documentary screenings with panel discussions after on my issue interests, which were mostly environmental. And then the Occupy movement hit, and I became much more radicalized and much more of an activist. And I sort of added protest to my toolbox. And I organized probably 3 dozen protests in the few years between Occupy and the Bernie Sanders campaign. And then Bernie was like a logical extension. Like if Occupy believed in electoral politics and if they had a candidate, Bernie would be the one, because he talked about wealth and income inequality. And as you know, Occupy was all about the 1% versus the 99%. And that's how I started Los Angeles for Bernie, which was a very large Bernie coalition. And then I became a delegate for him.
Now, you said Occupy Wall Street radicalized you. I thought that was a fascinating comment, because you and I were talking shortly before we started this. And, oftentimes people say use movements in order to pressure candidates. And, at a certain point, I always ask the question, why do I have to consistently push you into a position? Clearly, you're not in that position if I have to push you in that position. But in this case, Occupy Wall Street, this ground upswell, And we continuously hear that if Democrats have somebody to push them, that they can act a particular way. Well, yeah, this ground upswell that put the 1% on the map, this 99% versus 1% thing on the map. And Democrats crushed it. Like literally working with the FBI, instigating or infiltrating people into that organization itself. They, like they did other movements, whether you want to talk about Black Panthers trying to get Martin Luther King to kill himself, they infiltrated the group and tried to crush the movement. Why do you say that it radicalized you? Because I thought it was an interesting comment in the way your political arc, in the way that you yourself found, I guess, your expression in politics.
Well, I think I kind of realized that doing things within the system was not working. And I have similar feelings about my friends who are trying to infiltrate the Democratic Party right now. A lot of Bernie Sanders delegates and Bernie Sanders volunteers. Now, I support them. I have been very much a booster of their activities. I've gone up to all of the Democratic Party things, gone up to Millbrae for the e-board meeting, gone down for the convention in San Diego, and I cover what they're doing. And they're protesting even within these conventions. Mm-hmm. Since the Bernie Sanders campaign, the blue wave, as they call themselves, and I say they because I finally dem-exited last June myself, they have been continuing to do what the California delegation did at the DNC convention, which is protest within their very halls. And I cover those protests. And the Progressive Caucus, which sometimes pisses me off because they're not focusing enough on legislation. And there's this horrible legislation that goes through our democratically controlled state. We have 70% supermajority, so we don't even need Republicans. And yet Jerry Brown refuses to ban fracking. He's killing single payer, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a lot of legislation that I feel that our Progressive Caucus, which is all Bernie-crats at this point, should be focusing on, and they're not. But as an aside, I had been working, within the system all these years, and then I started to, I think Chris Hedges first became known to me during Occupy. Mm-hmm. And his book, Death of the Liberal Class, which I didn't read, but I watched a 1-hour C-SPAN book talk with him talking about it. And his whole idea that these liberal institutions that we had always thought would protect the little guy, the Democratic Party, the university, the unions, the church, the media, have all been co-opted.
They failed us, yeah.
By corporatism. And he feels, and I agree, that nonviolent civil disobedience is going to be the only thing that's going to make a change.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean when I say it radicalized me.
Chris Hedges is fascinating. I mean, the guy got fired from New York Times, because he was essentially protesting the war. He said the Iraq war was bogus. And yeah, he has a point on this. Like when you think about, I use the case of the Clinton investigation, the email case. When we're talking about our institutions, when we look at, they're talking about this thing of fake news. Is it fake news? Is this brand new thing? It's not a brand new thing. The only difference is the institutions that people have looked to for actual information have failed so miserably that the public don't look at those things as being authorities anymore. So now, you have somebody like an Alex Jones or some random person online that matches up with the same thing as like a New York Times or Washington Post or a senator or congressman. And his point is, those things have failed us. You would think that those institutions were supposed to be there, this kind of non-partial body, and they're not. So I like to point to the Clinton thing as a great example of that, because Comey comes out and says, we have the capacity. I mean, like, no reasonable prosecutor will prosecute this case. And then Zero Hedge comes out and almost like an hour later say, well, we found cases that Comey apparently could not find, meaning that the FBI was showing favoritism to one while not necessarily showing favoritism to somebody else. The institution itself failed.
Yeah.
The institution itself failed.
Similar to a conversation I had with Eric Holder at the convention.
Interesting.
I'll tell you about that. So I saw him at the top of the stairs right near the registration desk. And I wanted to ask him about why he didn't prosecute any of the banksters.
Yes.
I walked over to him and I said, Mr. Holder, my name is Lauren Steiner. I'm a Bernie delegate from Los Angeles, and I wanted to ask you a question if you don't mind. And he said, sure. So I said, seeing as your Justice Department didn't prosecute one single banker, I didn't use the word bankster. I didn't want him to see how radical I was. one single banker for the financial collapse, doesn't at the very least the optics look bad that you've now gone back to work for Covey and Burlington, the very law firm that represents all those banks? And he said, and I can't believe this, he said, listen, sweetheart, get your facts straight. I couldn't believe it. I mean, here he is calling this, what was I then, a 58-year-old woman, sweetheart. That's like me calling him boy, right?
Right. Yeah, right.
So he's, listen, sweetheart, get your facts straight. Number one, I do not represent the banks. And, you know, I wanted to say to him, and if he were on my show, I would have pressed him on this point, that maybe you don't represent the banks, but your firm does. And being as you're a partner, you take the profits from that representation. And then he said, second of all, don't you think that if we could make a case against those banks, it would be a career-making opportunity for some young prosecutor in my office? And I didn't really answer him because he was in the process of walking away. But, you know, Bill Black has dispensed with that argument. I mean, he has basically said that during the savings and loan scandal, which he was involved in, they had 1,000 FBI officers on that case, and over 1,000 people went to jail. Now, the savings and loan debacle was like a kid robbing a candy store compared to the financial collapse in 2008. And so it's just outrageous. And it's just, he's part of the corporatocracy, just like Obama's part of the corporatocracy.
There would have been more questions I would have wanted to ask too. I mean, when Holder gets out there and makes this argument that how did he say this? That the president himself doesn't need the judicial branch in order to make the determination on whether or not he can kill somebody else. Meaning he can make the determination. The presidential branch in and of itself can make the determination. Oh, that's it. Due process under law doesn't necessarily require the judicial branch. Which for all intents and purposes, the president of the United States can kill if the president of the United States wants to kill. I found that to be an amazing statement to say, like that's an amazing argument. And would Holder keep that argument if Donald Trump decided that he wanted to kill American citizens or other people around the globe?
Probably not.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that lefties have fundamentally missed, where people have made this argument that it's okay for Obama to have these powers. And I continuously made this case. What happens if you get a Mitt Romney? Because at the time, Mitt Romney was running. And what if you have Mitt Romney with a kill list or Mitt Romney killing American citizens? Would you be okay with that? Well, there's a difference between Romney doing what? What is the difference between Romney doing it and Obama doing it? There is no difference between those things. So let me ask you this. The DNC thing. You were a Bernie delegate and you went to the DNC convention. Overall, what was your experience there? I recovered the story about you guys doing Operation Boo, if that's what you want to call it, but it went beyond that. Like trying to block the Trans-Pacific Partnership, going beyond Sanders himself, because Sanders wasn't necessarily pushing for this particular thing in order to stop the platform from pushing this. Right. What were your experiences there at the DNC convention inside the bubble on this, inside the Democratic Committee itself? Or inside the Democratic National Committee?
Want me to talk about my planning that led up to the TPP protest a little bit?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So, you know, I've been very active in fighting the TPP. Fighting the TPP, fracking, and net neutrality have been my main issues between Occupy and the Bernie Sanders campaign. I organized one of the largest protests of Obama here in Los Angeles when he came for a fundraiser at Haim Saban's house against the TPP. And I'll always defend RT because they were there covering it. Well, actually, all the networks were there covering it, because what I know about broadcast stations is that they're not going to, especially local stations, they're not going to cover an issue like the TPP or fracking or net neutrality, but they will cover when the president comes to town. Yeah. So I tend to organize my protests around the visits of Obama or Hillary Clinton, because I know we're going to get coverage. So I was very distressed to see that he was pushing it. I mean, not surprised, because I quickly figured out that he was a corporatist. And
not just pushing it, didn't care that the rest of the public was fundamentally against it. Like I thought it was an amazing thing to watch. The president of the United States pushing this stuff in the way he was.
I think it also pretty much cost Clinton the election, you know, because she tried to distance herself from it, but it was clear that as Secretary of State, she touted it 45 times. And I actually caught something on Lawrence O'Donnell. Lawrence O'Donnell was interviewing Joel Benenson, who was her chief strategist. And he said, is she really going to oppose it, or is she just going to renegotiate it? And
Wow.
Benenson said she's going to renegotiate it.
That's amazing that O'Donnell asked that with a straight face, because fundamentally, if she answered yes, that means that she is fundamentally misleading and lying to the American public when she's saying she's against it.
Right, right. And so Benenson, I guess, didn't realize that his answer, his truthful answer, was going to hurt her. But, you know, a lot of people didn't pick up on that. Anyway, so I was watching what was going on with, you know, the platform committee. And I saw that they didn't get the Hightower Amendment passed, which was that Obama should not bring up the TPP during the lame duck session of Congress. But Bernie got a minority report, and he got 5 or 6 minority reports signed, which we all thought meant he was going to introduce them at the convention. Turns out, we find out maybe a week before that he's not going to introduce them. And the excuse was he wanted to save his powder for a floor fight on the rules. You know, the superdelegate rules. Right. So we scrambled, you know, those of us who were involved in it, including Rand Wilson from, you know, I forget which union he's involved in, but he's now Our Revolution, Massachusetts. And, you know, people that were involved in CWA, the Communications Workers of America, they were a big union fighting the TPP. We scrambled to come up with some sort of plan. They put together the signs, that the iconic signs with TPP, the red circle, and the X across it, that we were going to smuggle in there. And they weren't the big signs, because we knew we couldn't get in the big signs. So they were like a piece of paper that could be folded and put into a, you know, a backpack or whatever. So meanwhile, I said we ought to have a protest. And so I organized a call using Norman Solomon's group, Roots Action. I put a article together calling for this maestro call. We had a maestro call. There were about 126 people on the call, and we decided that we were going to have a meeting of the whips. We appointed state whips the night before the convention started, so Sunday night, of how we were going to do this thing. And we were going to do it on 3 fronts. First, we were going to try to pressure Dan Malloy, who was the chairman of that committee, to introduce it, basically saying, because we were not aware, we, the body of the convention, who the delegates are, that Bernie was not going to do it. Had we not been aware, we would have done it in the appropriate period of time. So we wanted to get him to do it. Then we were going to have this statement that we were going to get Hillary delegates to sign on to, too, basically saying that they don't also think that Obama should introduce it. And the third plan was to do this protest, to try to get the mic, you know, at one of the state delegations, try to get the mic. So we were working like with Jane Cleave and the person in Hawaii, someone who was a pro-Bernie, but we couldn't get anyone to agree to do that. So the fallback plan, the one that we implemented, was Jeff Engels, who is a delegate from Washington State, would start up in the Washington thing when they were up high too, just like California, because they knew we were going to be rambunctious. and he would say, mic check, and then we would go, mic check. So we did this Occupy style mic check in the hall of the convention. Oh, and we agreed that we would do it right when somebody from the platform committee said the word platform. So as soon as Elijah Cummings gets up there, poor Elijah Cummings, he had no idea what was going to hit him. He says platform, and then we start our mic check, and for like 5 minutes, we're chanting no TPP. And this was the first day in which everybody was booing. And you probably remember that Sarah Silverman was up there with Al Franken.
I remember, yeah.
And, you know, what was that famous thing she said?
Said you guys are being childish. And
yes.
You guys are being childish. And yeah. I watched that thinking, yeah, good luck with getting those people to vote for you, getting those people on the side.
Yeah, there's a big pushback against Sarah Silverman now. Anyway, Bernie sent a text, and we all had the impression that it was really not Bernie, because at that point he was working with the DNC and the Hillary campaign, that he, as a personal courtesy to him, he would appreciate that we not protest. We ignored it. And because we felt, look, the reason we were supporting Bernie Sanders, the reason everybody raised so much money, and California had to stay in a hotel room that was $700 a night.
Yeah.
So there were 4 and 5 people sleeping in these rooms. Sanders' campaign eventually came in to try to provide some assistance, but they didn't have any, and they said, oh, you have to stay in the hotel because we're going to be conferring with you and talking about what we're going to do and blah, blah, blah. I didn't listen. I stayed with a friend of mine who lived nearby for free, but everybody else took that real seriously, and they raised money on GoFundMe to stay in the hotel. They had one conference call with us in which that's all they talked about was staying in the hotel. They never talked about the plan. We didn't have meetings at breakfast or after breakfast. So the California delegation organized its own thing. We said, just because they said Jerry Brown is the head of our delegation, we're not going to take that. So we elected Karen Bernal, who's the head of the Progressive Caucus, and Bill Honigman, who is involved with the Progressive Democrats of Orange County, to be our co-chair. And we had meetings every day in which we plotted our strategy. So the TPP protest was just one of the things. We also did no fracking. We did no more war. And what they did was they tried to stop us at every turn. I mean, they had Hillary delegates taking our seats. They had Hillary delegates covering our signs with their signs. They had people trying to escort us out. And we got all of this on videotape, what we were kind of going through there. Meanwhile, the Hillary delegates thought they were at a party. I mean, this was just like a coronation for them. And they were like clapping at all the speeches and paying rapt attention and going off to the hospitality suites. And we were like planning and organizing, and it was like work. And it was very traumatic for a lot of people.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt, but you're right. It was. Some of those people were crying up there.
Yeah. And I missed the big thing with the media tent when we stormed the media tent. No one sent me the memo, so I don't know where I was at that point. Probably in the California cafe sponsored by Tom Steiner, talking to him about fracking. Tom Steiner, who's Mr. Impeachment.
Okay. I don't know who Tom Steiner is. He's in California, or is he?
Yeah. He's a California billionaire. His company was a hedge fund manager. His company was, I think it was called Farallon Capital or something like that. He sold his company to devote himself to fighting climate change. Wow. So his organization is called Next Gen Climate, but now he has Next Gen Action, and he's got over 1 million people that have signed a petition to impeach Trump. And he takes out ads. So he's the guy with the sort of whitish blonde hair, that's talking about Trump on MSNBC. And he's like one of the good billionaires, if you will. But as somebody who, supposedly fighting climate change, he has yet to come out and call for a ban on fracking in California. So that's what I remember arguing with him about that at one point at the convention.
Yeah, but you can't have it both ways. Like it's, you can't say there's an asteroid that's going to hit the planet. And I use that term because I like to put it in these dire circumstances, because if we believe scientists for everything else, and these guys are coming out, they did research recently where they were using satellites in order to come up with a more closer estimate of how bad climate change is. It was worse. Like it was going along the worst models, not, the mid-range models. These guys are 20,000 scientists recently signed a letter saying we are headed for a disaster. Like there's an asteroid that's about to hit the planet. And the candidate who supposedly believes in climate change is talking about fracking and is selling fracking all across the world. Like it doesn't make sense. It doesn't line up with one another. I mean,
Obama quadrupled fracking.
Yeah.
Jerry Brown, who's trying to be his legacy to be combating climate change, refuses to ban fracking. And it's come out that he's taken almost $10 million from the oil and energy interests. That's also why he refuses to shut down Aliso Canyon gas storage facility. We had the largest methane leak in the history. It leaked for 4 months. They finally shut it down. They relocated thousands of people. People are getting sick. Some people have died. And he refuses to shut it down because his sister, Kathleen, sits on the board of Sempra Energy, which owns that facility. So they actually created, and I'm going to be covering this on my show, they actually created an artificial storage, a shortage, to try to justify why that plant needs to be kept open.
Wow, that is amazing. That sounds like what they were doing with well, Enron, where they were creating these artificial weaknesses or these artificial depletions. And these guys were like laughing and joking at the depletion and all this other stuff. People didn't necessarily have energy production, but they were using this as a way to inflate the prices of Enron. It's monkeying around with energy markets seem to be one of those things that's, I guess, American is apple pie at this point.
And one of my biggest bugaboos is how the big green organizations, you know, side with a lot of the corporations that they should be fighting. Mm-hmm. So we talk about big labor and how some of the union leaders are sellouts, like the West Virginia thing. Yeah. You know, everybody's talking about the West Virginia thing like a big victory. Well, I did my show with one of the organizers for the union and the labor editor for the Worldwide Socialist website. And he said, no, it's not really a victory because A, it's 5%. They haven't gotten a raise in 5 years, so that's 1% a year. B, the money's coming out of tuition assistance programs and Medicaid. The coal companies and the energy companies aren't paying a dime. And C, the union leaders, Lily Escalon, Lily Garcia, and Randy Weingarten came swooping in to settle that thing without even doing a vote of the rank and file. Now, he defended it, the union guy, saying we don't have collective bargaining here, so we can't do the vote. But still, this is what they're doing in Oklahoma. They're going down and they're shutting down these protests before they can really create big changes. And I think this could be a very good development, but the leaders are, you know, because they want the seat at the table. They want the access. And this is what happened when I was fighting a fracking bill in 2013. Fran Pavley, who started the legendary cap and trade bill, it was called the Global Warming Solutions Act in California, that said we had to get back to 1990 levels by 2020. And we did do that, but they did that through cap and trade, which is a market-based mechanism and really not what we should be doing. And so she had this bill to regulate fracking, but it didn't really regulate it because it didn't say these oil wells had to be 2,500 feet away from a home, school, or business. It didn't say the well casings have to be this thick concrete. It just said, you know, we're going to notify you 30 days before we frack, which is great. What are we going to do? Sell our home in 30 days? We're going to do groundwater monitoring testing before the frack job, but only if you request it. We're going to disclose the chemicals, but not the concentrations, just what the chemicals are, which had already been disclosed to Henry Waxman's Energy Committee, by the way, and they are not good chemicals. Yeah. They're carcinogenic or they're just plain toxic. And we're going to have a study, and the study is going to take 2 years. And like we need any more studies to know that fracking is bad for us. So I led a citizen campaign using a Move On petition, using a Credo Action petition. We ultimately got 20,000 signatures to ask Fran Pavley to withdraw her bill and fight for a ban instead. Mm-hmm. And she didn't do it. And there were only 4 big green groups that were on this bill, including the NRDC, which is one of the biggest sellout groups, the League of Conservation Voters, another big sellout groups. And you look at who's on the board of directors of these people, and oftentimes they're lawyers, they're investment bankers, there's some even people in the energy industry. And what they want to do is they want to say, and Sandra Steingraber, who's a great fractivist from New York, called them out. They did the same thing in Illinois, stopping a really good bill to get this really weak bill, so that at the end of the year, they can tell their members, look at this great fracking regulation bill we got, you know, send us more money. So I was on the phone with Fran Pavley because she had spoken at 2 of the panel discussions that I organized after environmental films. And I said, Fran, I don't want to, you know, I've got these signatures. I've got this group. We're going to come protest your office. I'm going to give you an offer. You can either be there to receive it or you can not be there. So I was kind of giving her that courtesy. And I had this 25-minute call with her. And I finally said, nice. What can I say to you, you know, to get you to withdraw this bill and be the leader of our movement and fight for a ban? And she said, well, Lauren, you know that Jerry Brown is not going to sign any fracking ban. And I said, yes. And what I said, usually you think of these things the next day in the shower or something like that. But I thought of it right on the spot. I said, yes, but LBJ would not have signed the Voting Rights Act either unless a group of activists pressured him to and a strong legislator put forth the bill.
That's right.
Yep. So in other words, and when I spoke at the rally, we had 60 people. We gave her her staff the signatures. I said, you know, put down your red pen and use the bully pulpit of your office. And that's exactly what Bernie does.
Yeah.
He has used the bully pulpit. Now, unfortunately, for most of his career, he's been speaking to an empty chamber on C-SPAN. But now he's got the attention of the nation, and he's continuing. And this is what I love about Bernie. Even though I disagree with him, and I did a video called Bernie Sanders, Shut the Fuck Up. The Russia stuff, you know, I have to call him out on the things that he needs calling out on.
Of course. People, I've done videos where I've had to go at something that Sanders is doing. I've said before that you're not going to agree with everything that somebody does. And for all intents and purposes, no, I don't necessarily like the Russia stuff when he's calling the, you know, dealing this kind of Russian nonsense with the Democratic Party. He's undermining himself and he's undermining the left. But I try to look at this stuff from a contextual point of view with everything that he has done, everything that he's pushed for. By the way, the speaking to empty podiums in C-SPAN is credibility. Like I would imagine it's kind of painful. It's a little strange where, you know, you call yourself a socialist, you're in the well, nobody's listening to what you're saying. But that gives him a certain amount of credibility where people can look back over the past 30, 40 years and say, this guy has not changed. This guy has stood for it back then. This guy stands for it now. So wow. And there's another thing about this kind of fake legislation that some of these guys put. One of the Republicans is pushing through a net neutrality bill. Now, he's calling it net neutrality, but really it's a net neutrality that's doing exactly what you're saying these guys are doing for green energy. Meaning it's like, hey, we have this regulation, but the regulation is not really regulating anything, or at the very least not regulating anything that people want or need regulated. It's this kind of faux legislation that they put forth in order to say we did something on it when you really didn't do anything on it. And
by the way, Ted Lieu, who's my congressman, has not signed on that resolution that they need 51 senators. I don't know if they're going to get 51 senators, but even as a congressman, he has not signed on to the resolution to avoid the repeal of net neutrality. And here's a man who I actually contributed to his campaign because he assured me that he was against fracking, he was against the TPP, and he was in favor of net neutrality. But for the last year, he's done nothing but tweet about Trump, go on cable news about Trump. I mean, he's created this brand for himself. His own signature issue, which is Yemen, he actually had a bill last year that we should not fund Saudi Arabia anymore until they stop bombing Yemen. Yes. That was his bill. And he has been silent on the Sanders-Lee bill. He hasn't said a word about his own signature issue because he's too busy every damn day talking about Trump and Russia and Jared Kushner and blah, 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 blah. I'm so sick of it.
I'm so sick of it too. And it gets to the point where they're just demonizing Russia. Like everything is Russia's fault. You know, it's environmentalists all of a sudden is motivated by Russia, not because they want to get the environment fixed or changed. It's because of Russia. Or Sanders supporters are pissed off, not because they were cheated, but because of Russia. I mean, you go down the list. And now they're trying to migrate this over to Britain, where they're doing this thing of, oh my God, a spy has gone down, and it's Russia also. Like, I'm sick of it. I'm sick of it. Yeah, no proof. The only word that they've given was Theresa May's. And you know, it's like you have to take Theresa May's for it, a embattled, weak prime minister, that what she's telling you is absolutely correct and absolutely truthful. It's insane.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I make these little hashtags for people. And my hashtag for Rachel Maddow is McCarthyite Maddow.
Yes. You know, yes, she's a conspiracy theorist.
I have counterfeit Kamala, and I spell counterfeit with a K, and bought Booker. And I just came up with one for my own mayor, Gutless Garcetti.
Gutless Garcetti.
Because he's gutless. He won't do anything about the real problems. He's like Obama. He's like this empty suit, this Manchurian candidate that they're positioning to run for president. And, you know, it's just so disturbing to me.
Well, this gets to a good point. So you work within the party politics to some degree. I know you said you've gotten to the point where you've become somewhat radicalized in the way that you've gone about it. But you're still somewhat of a mover and shaker in regards to the Democratic thing, I would imagine, or at the very least to the left, the Democratic part or the progressive left of the party. Do you think that there's change possible inside the party itself?
No.
I don't think so either. I don't think so either. I don't think there's anything pushing against it to make it change. Like if there was my assessment of this has been, in the old days, you had other groups, whether you want to talk about socialists, socialist, communists, unionists, you had these leftist organizations and activist groups that were real leftist activist groups. And they were pushing against the party to try to make the party something fundamentally different. And at one point, you even had labor, where the Democratic Party was associated with labor. But the moment that it became, it's not a co-equal partnership, it's you have nowhere else to go, then you've lost all power within that organization. Ultimately, they look at you and say you have nowhere else to go, and they do whatever they want, assuming that labor is going to back them up because labor has nowhere else to go. And unfortunately, this has become this way across the board. Blacks, Hispanics, labor have all ended up with the situation of you have nowhere else to go unless you want a maniac to take office. You're going to vote for us, even if we pass the Trans-Pacific Partnership, even if we invade Syria with military troops, even if we, privatize Wall Street. Because I asked this question: what happens if in 2016 Hillary Clinton wins, and say you get to 2020, Ted Cruz is on the other side of the dispatch box, and Hillary Clinton has privatized Social Security. She has passed the Trans-Pacific Partnership after changing a comma in the document. She's put troops in Syria where she's on the brink of a war. What happens? I guarantee you that the arguments that will be made will be the exact same arguments that were made for Trump and Hillary. You have to vote for her. Ted Cruz is a maniac. It doesn't matter what she did. I agree with you on this. I have a hard time believing that change comes within the party apparatus itself.
Well, see, a lot of these people are low information voters too. Is that feedback?
No, you're fine.
Okay, because I'm hearing.
Oh, let me kill my mic for the moment. Let's see. I'm not hearing feedback, but I can cut my volume. Go for it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not hearing it anymore. So yes, a lot of people are low information voters. Like, I was trying to talk to some of those Hillary delegates, and they were very nice people. They actually did not know that Obama quadrupled fracking. They did not know that he was pushing the TPP. They did not know that he prosecuted more whistleblowers and journalists under the Espionage Act than all presidents combined in the last 100 years since it was enacted. They did not know that he started 5 new drone wars in addition to Afghanistan and Iraq that were already going when he took office. They didn't know these things because it's like my team versus your team. And I feel that that's really the problem on both the left and the right. When it's just a matter of which team you're on, and it doesn't matter how they vote once they're in office. Like Doug Jones, for instance. I tweeted something out yesterday in which I said, I'm so glad we all worked so hard to get this Doug Jones to beat Roy. This is after he was one of the
pedophile. Yeah, he beat a pedophile, barely beat a pedophile.
This is the second bad vote he's done. And the bank deregulation, and then what was the other one? The tax scam? I can't remember, but it was a very bad vote. Yeah. And I said, I'm so glad we worked so hard to get this guy in office. I said, Roy Moore, it was the Yemen thing. First it was the bank deregulation, and then he didn't vote for Bernie's bill with Yemen.
Stop get us out of Yemen. Right.
So I said, Moore only wanted to screw a couple of underage girls. This guy is screwing the entire country and now the world, I mean, let's put things into perspective here, but that's what they do. The Democrats, it's all about gods, guns, and gays. And they love that because it's identity politics also, because we can be good on those issues, but on the economic issues, the Democrats and the Republicans are just the same. And that's
the donors.
My objection to the Democratic Party. That's why I don't think they're ever going to change. And while these other issues are important, I do think, and this is what I got out of Occupy, and this is what I think Bernie believes, although he changed a lot with his racial justice platform, because he used to think, oh yes, it's just a matter of economic equality, education equality, if you have all these opportunities. But he, like I always say, Eric Holder, speaking of Eric Holder, was the top lawyer of the land, and he continues to get pulled over for driving while black.
Yeah.
So, systemic institutional racism is a real thing. And I just closed with something yesterday on Facebook, which was shocking to me, probably shouldn't have been shocking to me, but it even said rich black kids who grow up in rich neighborhoods that have, Ivy League educations, still don't succeed to the same degree as their white counterparts.
Yeah.
So it's just really endemic.
you know, I usually take the position that it's more about class than race. Now, I take that position because I realize that any discussion about race deals with class. Like it's almost like those things are interrelated. Martin Luther King was a socialist and an anti-imperialist, but he was also strong on civil rights. Like you don't need to be one or the other. You can be all three of those things. Like they don't necessarily conflict with one another. Democrats have this tendency of focusing on identity because it doesn't affect their donors. It's
Yes.
the same reason that they go after the NRA and they go after identity because those are easy topics. In corporate America, it is great to have more people who are in part of the process who can actually buy those goods so that in no way adversely affects the Democratic Party. Gay marriage, same thing. In no way adversely affects the Democratic Party. Now, the moment that you start talking about, let's say, foreclosures during the bank the bill, meaning when it's actual issues where they have a choice in the matter that they can make a difference. So you have the choice of a public option. No, we don't do a public option. We do, this right-wing healthcare plan. You have the choice of making sure Medicare can pay for drugs or at the very least barter for drugs. Nope, we don't do that either. We allow drug companies to charge as much as they want, even though we're doing healthcare. Like it's like I don't think anybody can make the argument that when Obamacare was enacted, somebody said, hey, what's the best way to supply healthcare to everybody in the country for the best price? That's not the topic. That's not the conversation. The topic was how do we get it across the line, and how do we get corporations to come on board with this where they won't necessarily attack us relentlessly for doing it? And this utopian idea that you can have like healthcare companies, like everybody is a win-win. Like these guys can still make their millions of dollars and you still provide awesome healthcare for the people in the country. It's insanity. Yeah, it's insanity.
This is where indivisible. Okay, so I have my problem with I call it the MIC resistance. I don't know who said it first, Jimmy or me, used that term, but I call it that.
MIC resistance, right?
MIC resistance. Cats, the Women's March. I mean, I did a video to show that they are taking money from Priorities USA, whose biggest donor is George Soros. Yeah. I mean, basically, I found something on the Priorities USA website. I'm getting feedback again. Yeah, sorry. I found something on Priorities USA website. It was their About Us page or their mission statement or whatever. And they said, we're going to be for the resistance what the Koch brothers were for the Tea Party. So that's when I knew that after the Trump election, that's where the Democratic Party was now channeling their money. So it automatically raised my antennas to be suspicious of anything that Indivisible was doing. And I did a live stream they had a call, it was a 1-hour call to save the ACA. And on that call, they had Planned Parenthood, they had something called Health Access, I forget the name of the healthcare group. But for 1 hour, and they're very good, Indivisible, because they really give you a good guide of how to call your congressman, how to influence your congressman. Not one time did they say, oh, when you call your congressman to say vote against the repeal of Obamacare, mention to them that, by the way, the ultimate solution is single payer. No, never mention that, not once, because the Democratic Party does not want to lose the donations from the health insurance industry and big pharma. And Planned Parenthood, too, by the way, I had to go to a right-wing site to find this out. I hate looking on these pro-life sites, but they did show that Planned Parenthood has gotten contributions from 3 of the top health insurance companies. That's why they never support single payer. And they actually signed a letter to Anthony Rendon, who is the Speaker of the California Assembly, who shelved our single payer bill last year, supporting the decision, as did the SEIU, the Service Employees Workers.
That's amazing. That is amazing. Mm-hmm. That is amazing. Yeah, man. The moment that money gets into the process, it becomes suspicious. I mean, it's like, certainly it's in the best interest of the people who support those organizations for them to have single payer healthcare. Like you would think that would be the most natural thing in the world for a leftist group to support. And if they don't support it, you have to kind of ask that's a question of why. Why don't you support this? And yeah, when you start tracing the money back, it starts to look extremely suspicious. That is it possible that they're not supporting this because of the money that's being put into their pockets?
Well, here's one more story I want to tell you. And I know you're probably running short of time, but when I was fighting fracking, when I was like 2012, 13, 14, it was one of my biggest issues. I went down to the city of Carson because they are working class people of color where they have a lot of oil and other types of toxic projects. And Occidental Petroleum wanted to drill 200 new wells. And the mayor, Albert Robles, put forth a bill to have a moratorium on fracking. So Maria Elena Durazo, who was at the time the executive secretary of the LA County Federation of Labor, which is the local version of the AFL-CIO, it's got 54 unions in it, she bussed in 500 workers that were all wearing shirts that said "Jobs for Carson." They were mostly IBEW, the electrical workers, and the Teamsters. And she got them all to testify. Testimony, the public comment lasted for hours, to testify against this fracking moratorium bill. And there she was. I actually have a photo of it, and I posted it recently because she's running unopposed for Kevin De Leon's seat, because Kevin De Leon is termed out and he's running against Dianne Feinstein. So
and she was supporting fracking. She was coming out in a strong show of fracking.
Yep.
Wow.
The woman who cut her teeth working with Cesar Chavez and the farm workers movement, which is about the health and safety of farm workers, okay? She is advocating for more fracking in Carson, even though, get this, there were only 34 permanent jobs. The jobs would not go to Carson residents. They would go to people from North Dakota or Texas who were experienced in fracking, and they weren't even unionized jobs.
See, right there. That's where people lose me on the party thing. Like, who is she representing in this situation? Like, the people who are there, like you said, it's not because she's creating jobs for the people of Carson. And even if she was, it's not that they're creating many jobs for the people of Carson. And yet she's doing something that is tremendously bad from an environmental standpoint. Now, if you're a right winger and you just go with this idea that, climate change doesn't exist, the environment doesn't matter, it's just here for us to use for whatever reasons, right, then that's different. But that's not her position. Her position is something fundamentally different. And the thing that she's doing politically is running contrary to the position.
Well, here's what, and I was going to say, the picture that I took of her sitting right next to George Milstein, who is the $1,000 an hour attorney for Occidental Petroleum. The two of them are sitting right next to each other in league to stop the fracking moratorium. The reason she did it is the building trades unions in the AFL-CIO can make a lot of money in refineries and these jobs. They can make $120,000 a year working in an oil refinery. So that's why they were in support of the Dakota Access Pipeline. They were in support of the Keystone Pipeline, because this is jobs, jobs, jobs. Now, the problem with unions today, and my guest, Jerry White, the labor editor from the Worldwide Socialist website, will tell you that unions are, they call them business unionism, as opposed to social movement unionism. They're just supporting their own members, their own contracts, their own benefits, which are fine, but it ends up not working because they stop using the tool that they have. Like Bill Curry, who I want to have on my show, he was a pundit. He wrote a lot about pro-Bernie articles during the primary. He said that unions have traded pressure for access. Pressure being like the strike. The same thing with journalists. Journalists didn't used to have college degrees. They didn't used to go to Columbia Journalism School. They used to be these scrappy people that would hang around City Hall and uncover the corruption and really, hold the politicians' feet to the fire. Today, the journalists come from the same social class as the politicians. They all send their kids to the same private schools, Sidwell friends. They all go to Katharine Graham's, when she was alive, cocktail parties. They all meet up at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. So they're in the club. They are from the same social class. They do not represent the people anymore. And that's what's happened, to like what Chris Hedges would say in his Death of the Liberal Classes. So many of these institutions have been co-opted. And so, that's what happened there with
they become stenographers. I mean, in real terms, they've become stenographers. It's like you're right. Ultimately, they traded access. It's like, I need to have access, and so I can't necessarily hit this person as hard as I would typically hit this person if I was actually looking for corruption and investigating. Instead, I take what they tell me and I run with it. Perfect example. Tulsi Gabbard comes back from Syria. And when she comes back from Syria, she tells Jake Tapper, hey, we're supporting terrorists in Syria. And Jake Tapper immediately reflexively gives the government's perspective, saying, well, the government said it's not doing that. Well, Jake, I've just came from there. That's exactly what we're doing. We're supporting terrorists in that particular region of the world. Now, you fast forward, it becomes overt that the United States is doing this. I always ask the question, does Jake Tapper not know, or is Jake Tapper not saying?
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think what I realize is Jake Tapper is just not saying. Jake Tapper knows. Meaning, they're stenographers. It's like the defense official told me this, and this is what I'm relaying to the public.
Yeah.
End of story.
And that's the whole thing about objectivity. You know, the climate change people say this, the climate deniers say that. So even though it's only 0.1% of climate deniers,
yeah,
by showing both sides, they're making it look like it's
a real debate. It's not a, yeah. I mean, like, because look, if this argument was done from the standpoint of this kind of new agey stuff, if we were having this conversation about, you know, this, what are the metaphysics of our environment, what is reality, and that type of stuff, fair enough. I'll give a pass on this idea of scientists being the carte blanche, knowing everything, because it's impossible for them to know. But we're talking about physical matter reality. We're talking about the environment. We're talking about things that you can study, that you can measure, that you can weigh. And one circumstance after the next, we trust scientists for all these other things. I mean, when we get in our car, we trust that the car is going to work. When we cut the light switch on, we trust that the lights are going to come on. But on this very specific issue, there's debate. And I find it's amazing that there's debate on this very specific issue. When, like, carte blanche, the overwhelming majority of scientists are saying one very specific thing, and you have maybe one tiny 0.1% saying something else. And all of a sudden, the media holds this up as if it's a conversation between two equal sides. It's not such, you know, no such thing. No such thing. Let me ask you this. Somebody, do you have time for one or two questions or comments from the audience?
Sure.
Okay. Rob Lenois, he wanted me to mention my no position. I guess I call it the no argument. Fundamentally, I guess what it boils down to is I don't necessarily think that being complicit and just giving your vote in this kind of perfunctory way is going to get anything done from the party itself. Like, I think of the ridiculousness of the situation where we've moved further and further to the right, and Democrats have just said you have nowhere else to go, and people just agree, said, yes, you're right, we have nowhere else to go. I compare this to like an abusive spouse, where we're, you know, it's like the lefties or progressives are the political the politically abused spouses or the abused spouses of the political spectrum. I mean, because honestly, all of the things that lefties want, you look at what took place at the Democratic National Committee, they outright cheated one of the candidates. They outright lied continuously to the public itself. Now, this goes beyond them passing NAFTA and some of this other stuff, the healthcare, all those things, all the betrayals. But even going to the point of actually lying, outright lying, and still expecting those people that they've lied to and cheated to get their vote. And many of them did. Like, there were more lefties that voted for Hillary Clinton than Hillary Clinton people voted for Obama, to put it in context. Like, the number of people that still, after everything took place, still turned around and voted for Hillary Clinton. I don't think you get changed that way by being complicit. Like, I don't think putting somebody in that office and then saying, now I'm going to pressure you now that you're in that office to do something else. The same dynamics are going to play out again in the very next election of you must vote for this person because the other guy is a maniac. And if you don't, the world is going to come to an end. I don't think you get anywhere with that strategy of just voting in this kind of complicit way. Well, I'm curious. What do you think about that? So do you can tell us if you want. I mean, it's a secret on who people voted for. But who did you vote for the election and why? Like the 2016 election. And
well, it's a funny story because when I was at the DNC, I saw Jill Stein, who I had met several times before, and I interviewed her. I did a live stream with her, and I publicly announced in the DNC, even though I could have been expelled as a delegate, I'm with my candidate, you know, who I'm voting for in November. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, I ended up, and I did not decide until I was in the voting booth. I was live streaming while I was voting, and I found myself writing in Bernie Sanders. But he was a qualified write-in candidate.
Yeah.
This is what happened to me. I interviewed my friend, fellow delegate Brian Carolus, who was one of the 55 people who qualified to be electors. Mm-hmm. You could find 55 people, and all the paperwork, you know, checked out. Anyone could be a qualified write-in candidate. So 55 people got together and they decided that it was going to be for Bernie. I interview him, right? And the Greens start attacking me. I have people coming to my page, including Tim Black, who I had never met. He wasn't a Facebook friend, but somebody said, you better get on Lauren Steiner. They were accusing me of supporting that Opt-Deny 270 movement.
Yeah.
Remember where they were? And I barely even knew what that was. I mean,
I don't even know what that is. What is that?
They were trying to deny Hillary Clinton the 270 votes to get the nomination. This is when everybody thought she was going to win.
Okay.
And the Green Party was so rabid. I said, you know, if you spent more time going out into the communities, canvassing for Jill Stein, if you spent as much time as you spend harassing me, canvassing, she might actually win. So it totally soured me on the Green Party at that point.
I see.
You know, not to mention the fact that I just, you know, feel they're just tainted, you know, that we needed a new party. And I was on the original steering committee of Draft Bernie with Nick Brana. And I felt that had Bernie had the courage to do that, I think he made a mistake. I think Bernie, if he ran with Jill, he could have won. I think if he started the People's Party, it could win. He has a view of third parties left over from the early 1970s when he got like 1% and 2% of the vote for running as an independent. And he doesn't seem to appreciate the fact that the vast majority of people today, or I should say the plurality of people, are independents. And he could get, you know, their vote, Democrats' vote, and even Republicans' vote, as you talked about earlier before we started. There are Republicans that would have voted for Bernie Sanders. I know because I've talked to them anecdotally. And so Bernie.
What mistakes do you think he made during the campaign? I mean, is that, I know that's one of them. I don't know if I fully agree with that. Let me say it this way. It's one of those things where it's a blind spot to me. It's a corner that I can't necessarily see around, because I can see two things have happened. I like this idea that Hillary Clinton lost on her own merits. Like nobody can point the finger and say Bernie Sanders made Hillary Clinton lose. You have some rabid. Well, yeah, but those are rabid Hillary Clinton supporters. And most people, when Hillary Clinton wrote that book screaming, "What happened?" most people laughed at that book. Like they laughed at this idea. It's like, oh my God, this woman is so vain and egotistical that she just doesn't go away. I like that response, as opposed to having some level of oomph behind the thing of Bernie Sanders. If Bernie Sanders didn't run against Hillary Clinton would have won. Like, I don't want them using Bernie Sanders as a punching doll, saying that he is responsible for Hillary Clinton losing because he ran as a third party. I like this idea that she lost on her own merits.
Yeah.
But I could be wrong. Like, I don't necessarily, I can't see around the corner. That's why I can't be hard one way or the other on it. It's very possible. You're absolutely right that those people wanted something different. And that was his moment where he had moved the crowd to such a degree that if he gave them an alternative, that he would have split the vote in a way that Sanders could have been president of the United States.
Yeah. I mean, I think if he runs as a Democrat again in 2020, which I think he will, I think he could win now, no matter what the DNC does, no matter what the media does, because people know who he is. He's still going around the country doing these things. I really love what he's doing with Now This, The Guardian, Young Turks, you know, doing these town halls on the subject. Like, here's the thing. You and I know that unless the Democrats run on the issues that are important to the American people, Trump is going to get reelected. I mean, they can't just be anti-Trump and Russia now, because those issues do not matter to the American people. They matter to the punditry, to the political class. But the average person who's trying to work 2 and 3 jobs and still can't get ahead, they don't really care whether Trump colluded with Russia to hack the election or not. You know, that's just, it's so tone deaf. But to get back to your question about the campaign, I feel like Obama ran a great campaign because he used the techniques of Marshall Gantz, which I took his class, Leadership, Organizing, and Action, at the Kennedy School of Government. It was a great class, online. 121 activists from like 26 countries took this class with him. And we learned about public narrative, the story of self, the story of us, and the story of now. And that's what Obama did in his 2004 convention speech that catapulted him to the national stage. I mean, when I heard that speech, I said, this man is going to be president someday. I'll never forget where I was when I heard that speech. This man is going to be president someday. I had no idea it would be in only 4 years. But, you know, because what Marshall teaches is that people make decisions based on emotion, which is provoked by stories. not by reason, which is evoked by facts and statistics. Now, Bernie Sanders, ironically, is the exception that proves the rule, because he never talked about his personal story. He only talked about facts and statistics. But because of what you said, the fact that the people who voted for him, millennials, have incredible bullshit detectors, and they can go on YouTube and they can watch him grilling Alan Greenspan or talking against the Iraq War or speaking against NAFTA 25 years ago. I mean, he has the three words that I always used to describe Bernie were authentic, consistent, and compassionate.
Yeah.
He even said on Barbara Walters, she said, what one word would you want to be known for? And he said compassionate. So I thought that was interesting. But Obama used the technique in his campaign of distributed field organizing, right? He had people, like you could call them precinct captains, that went around and did their own public narrative on behalf of him. They were like surrogates for him, if you will. Bernie didn't do that. He had the digital organizers, and they thought they could do everything online. And so, and then his biggest mistake, I think, was hiring his old friend Tad Devine to be his media advisor.
I see.
He was also his chief strategist, and that's a conflict of interest because his chief strategy to Bernie ended up being TV. And 50% of everybody's hard-earned dollar, I mean, people were sending from their Medicare checks, you know, for their Social Security checks, $27 a month to Bernie. 50% of those dollars went for TV ads when the majority of millennials, who was Bernie's base, have cut the cord. Now, the America ad was brilliant.
Yes, it was.
But I looked at that thing and I said, you know, he's not running for a Clio award. He's running for president. And I feel like when he got out to California, which was the state with the largest number of delegates, right? He had already let go 190 of his field organizers. He came into after losing New York. He came into California with $6.9 million cash on hand. And everybody was writing about how that's not even enough money to do any kind of decent TV buy. And Tad Devine was quoted in Politico as saying, well, we're probably not going to do TV. And what ended up happening was Mike Sarasso, who was the state director, ended up quitting in protest because they decided to take $2 million of that money and buy TV ads that nobody would, it wasn't enough ads, nobody was watching it, it wasn't his base.
Yeah.
And they could have hired back all of those 190 organizers. You know, they only had 5 offices in California. They only had
as big as California is.
50 organizers. They had 100 organizers in New Hampshire. So I feel like they really made some internal mistakes. Also, Bernie did not use his super volunteers, like people like me, and I have so many counterparts throughout the country who were literally working every day for him. I have a collection of 15 Bernie Sanders t-shirts for an entire year. I was a walking billboard for him. I lived, dreamed, eat, slept Bernie Sanders. And yet he disregarded us, he disregarded our ideas, and he brought in these people that were using the NPG van, and they were targeting likely Democratic voters. Yeah. And I'm like, no, likely Democratic voters are going to go for Hillary. You need to target all voters. Don't go down a street and skip houses just because you don't have them as likely Democratic voters.
You know, I think it changed over time. Like him doing these live debates in part, but also doing like the live broadcasts. He's been doing them on YouTube. He's been doing them on, like you said, the Young Turks and these other lefty networks. I love that because it means that at some point he's come to the conclusion, I'm bypassing corporate media and I'm going directly to the public. It's like a fireside chat. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's see. We had a few people ask questions or at the very least make comments. One had to do with the have you researched the leftist revolution in Rojava?
Oh gosh. Sounds like a question I'm not gonna
I think someone asked me this before and I didn't know about it. I didn't know enough about it to answer the question. So it was asked again, so I'm asking you, and I'm writing it down. FTW all day. I am writing this down so I can look into this question. I've gotten a few questions actually. Some people asked about about what's taking place in South Africa, where they're making the consideration of taking property from white farm owners and giving it back to the population who had it beforehand. Because that's one of those interesting thickets that they were like, you know, it was like, talk about that, talk about that. But let me see. I don't
I was
see.
in South Africa, by the way, in
Really?
2010.
What did you
And
think about it? How was it? I love to travel, so.
well, you know, it was interesting because the most interesting part for me was going to the townships. I went to Soweto outside of Johannesburg. I went to one called Mashipumili, which was outside of Cape Town. And it was just incredible, the poor conditions that, you know, the people still live in there. I mean, no, they didn't have inside running water. They didn't have inside plumbing. And yet they have an aristocracy class there. You know, Zuma was very corrupt.
Mhm.
And it's a good thing that he's gone. I mean, thinking that this new guy who's so wealthy, maybe he doesn't need to enrich himself anymore. So maybe he'll actually do stuff for the people. You know, it sometimes it takes someone from that class
To get something done.
you know, look at FDR, you look at JFK. It's like you have so much money, you don't really care to make any more money. But I look at Clinton and I look at Obama, who came from nothing, and I see them using their offices as a way to enrich themselves. I mean, what is the first thing Obama does? He makes a $400,000 speech to a bank.
Money in pockets. I'm collecting on my investment or your investment.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, just to put a fine point on it. I always ask this question, and I asked this addendum to the question, or switch the question slightly for people who do media, who do news. Of all the stories that you've covered, what was the story that you yourself have latched onto the most? What was the story that dug you the most, or that you found the most interesting? And it could be more than one, by the way. You're not in a rush. But what was the thing that has, I guess, either captured your attention, or something that you believe needs to be flagged as being extraordinarily important, or that you saw as being important?
Well, something that I'm working on right now, actually, and that is pornography.
That's interesting. I got to be honest. That was not what I expected you to say. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yes. Well, I encourage you to watch my interview with Gail Dines. It's called Feminism and Pornography.
Okay.
Because I feel that pornography, and she does too. She's a woman who was the head of the sociology department at Wheelock College. She just left her career in academia for 30 years. She's a radical feminist who's against pornography, to focus on her organization, Culture Reframed.
Yeah.
And we call it Stop Porn Culture. And she talks about how pornography is this untalked about public health epidemic, because young children are learning about sex from porn.
Yes.
And no matter, as a parent, and I went through this with my younger son, as a parent, you can install Net Nanny or any of these kind of blockers, but believe me, the kids get around it. So you have pornography, right? Which has completely compartmentalized. It's totally separated, not just sex from love, forget about love, but just from emotion.
Yeah, love has nothing to do with it at this point. It's like completely.
Nothing about relationships. There's nothing about emotional intimacy. It's all about, you know, you just see. I mean, to me, it's not even arousing as a woman, because it's just so technical.
Yeah.
And but the problem is, kids are learning about sex from this, because parents don't want to talk about sex to their kids. The schools certainly don't. You know, half the states don't even have sex education, and those that do, they're just focusing on how to get pregnant, how to stop getting pregnant, how to stop STDs, et cetera, et cetera. Nobody talks about relationships. And when I went to Cuba a couple of years ago, it was a political trip with Code Pink. It was fantastic. I wish there were more political travel groups around, because that to me is more interesting than museums and shopping. You know, so we talked with Mariela Castro, who's Raul's daughter, and she's a sexologist by profession. She's also in the parliament, and she says their sex education in Cuba is very all-encompassing. It's about relationships, it's about intimacy, it's about connection. And what happens when you compartmentalize sex the way we do, you're creating a group of people that do not know how to have intimate relationships. And at the extreme, with sex addiction, with pornography addiction, it leads to erectile dysfunction disorder. And most of the pornography today is not your father's Playboy. It's what they call gonzo porn, which is extremely violent. At most, I mean, at least women are getting slapped all over their body. They're getting, you know, gagged. They're getting, I mean, I could get really graphic with you, but what's going on in this pornography that anybody can see. And what happens is you become inured to it, and you need something more. The biggest category right now is incest porn. You know, it's like you got to keep upping the level. And Gail was talking to a producer. She goes to the porn conventions, and that's how she gets all her information. So she's talking to this producer, and he said, Gail, it's not me, it's the viewers. I mean, we do the thing. And so there was this one case she told me about where they had the woman's head in the toilet bowl, like they were waterboarding her while they were doubly anally penetrating her. You know? I mean, this is what goes on. And my feeling is, okay, so when I talk to millennial, look, I know this is getting
no, go for it. I am curious about. I disagree with you on this, but go ahead. That's what I'm saying. I find this fascinating because Chris Hedges agrees with you on this. Chris Hedges is also in this camp that pornography is a horrible thing, and I end up on the side of, is it the pornography or is it the culture itself? Like, you have sex in everything. Like if you're watching Vampire Diaries, they're supposed to be teenagers. They're having rampant sex with vampires that are supposed to be like 200-300 years old. But at the end of the day, this is still a kid or teenagers in these relationships as if they're adults. But that's not just those shows. That's throughout our culture. When they're selling coffee, when they're selling a car, when they're selling clothing, it's look how it's not these jeans fit very well. It's look how great my ass looks in these jeans. Like, this is a cultural thing. This is not, I guess my feeling is like it's beating up on porn. And porn is for all intents and purposes, giving the public in this kind of capitalistic way what the public is pushing for. But go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. I agree.
No, I agree with you. That's why she calls it porn culture. It was originally called Stop Porn Culture because Hugh Hefner commodified pornography and he pornified commodities. Yes. I mean, it was a great quote that she gave in our interview. And we also talked about the next point that I was going to make is about millennial feminists, what we call third wave feminists, as opposed to myself, a second wave feminist, how neoliberalism has affected feminism. Okay, because second wave feminists, it was all about collective liberation. If one of us is free, doesn't matter, we all have to be. Third wave, it's been changed by neoliberalism to be about individual empowerment. Like Sheryl Sandberg, lean in feminism. As long as I break the glass ceiling, that's what counts.
Hillary Clinton is president of the United States and everybody is great. The world is, we're running in the sun. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I'm with her. Right. I'm with her.
So today's feminists think, and they've also been sold choice. It's the other thing that I'm fighting is charter schools, because charter schools, they may be nonprofit, but they're still privately run, but they're publicly funded. And it is basically, I mean, we could do a whole show on this. I have done. It is defunding public education, but they use choice. See, choice is a very neoliberal liberal word. Like everything is a commodity that we get to choose from. No, we're part of a society and we all should have the great thing. It shouldn't be just a choice for some of us to pick. Similarly, so people are talking about sex positivity and sex worker, like it's like this legitimate profession. Well, Lily Starling, I don't know if you know her, but she doesn't have a YouTube show, but she's a very active, I guess you could call her a Facebook pundit, if you will, here in California. She had a great quote. She said, if you don't have options, you don't have choice. And it's like this. If you have like people that are going off to war, okay, working class people who used to be able to get a job in a factory because they didn't have a college education. Now they don't have the factories anymore. They can't afford to go to college. They don't want to get into hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. They go to war because it's for the, to get the education. They're not choosing to go over there and get maimed and maybe killed. That's not really choice.
Yeah.
Similarly, when you hear about adjunct professors, and I'm going to do a show about this because more and more professors are adjunct now as opposed to fully tenured. They're making $2,500 a course. They're making like $12,000 a year. They're at poverty level, sleeping in their car, and a lot of women professors are turning to sex work. And I will tell you that when these women went to school to get their PhD in English literature, they weren't thinking about how they were going to be selling their bodies at some point.
Now, see, that part I agree with you on. I think the issue with sex work in an odd way is it's the fact that it's work, if that makes sense. Like we have, but we have to accept something else. We have a religious culture. And so with this religious culture, we look at sex as being something fundamentally different. But understand that's the way our society looks at this. We put this kind of extra burden on this. Is there really that great of a difference between a person working at McDonald's in a job that they absolutely hate, that they're completely alienated from, versus somebody who's doing sex work? I mean, and I say this to say, is a job a job a job? We commodify all of these things. Is sex different in this case? And is sex only different because our society has this kind of religious influence associated with sex?
Well, I have more of a problem, I think, with the pornography than the people who choose prostitution or even to work in a strip club or anything like that, because a lot of people are going into pornography. You know, they're sex trafficked. There are also people that come out to LA to become an actress. And of course, that doesn't work out. Or even some of their boyfriends are pimping them into doing this free porn where they're not even getting paid. But it's the objectification. And I just came back from the anti-pornography conference in Salt Lake City. Mm-hmm. Yes, there were a lot of Mormons there, but my opposition is not from sex, because I probably have more sex than most millennials I know. But no, it's not coming from that place at all. So I don't have any moral objection to it, and I would not say that it should be banned or censored. And I do think that prostitution should be decriminalized. Yeah. You know, but I
agree with you on this, though. Let me say it this way. I always make the point that the issue with pornography is that they're paid for it. Now, if you had a couple and that couple decided they wanted to make a video, the world is good. No issue. Nobody is, you know, there's not this person being coerced. This person is enjoying what they're doing. If for whatever reason, they like to be a little bit showy. If it's a situation where somebody is at rock bottom and they're doing it to make ends meet, I have to be honest, it becomes a little seedier. Like it feels ickier in this case, because it doesn't feel like the person is doing it because they want to. They feel like they're doing it because they need to make a buck.
Not even what you're talking about, like it is work. Work is work is work. And in capitalism, a lot of work is pretty bad.
Yeah.
It is the objectification and the violence in the pornography. Because there were 50 studies that basically show, and at one point when you have 50 studies, you don't need to do any more studies, you know, that show that it could lead to sexual assault. So I covered a 2-hour Me Too Survivors March and Rally in Hollywood a few months ago. And they were talking about advertising. They were talking about movies. They were talking about hip hop. And I even heard a woman today, I think her name was Brittany Jones. She's a professor at Rutgers, who was talking about hip hop and how we're finally dealing with the objectification of women in that. But there was nobody there to speak about pornography. And that is the ultimate objectification and violence, where you actually are seeing people being gagged and choked and slapped and all sorts of other things that women don't like. I mean, that's the funny story. When I talked to my son, my older son, when he was in 7th grade, and I saw that he had watched this, I said, you know, I'm not going to tell you can't.
Good luck with that. Yeah, good luck with that.
No, we're going to watch it anyway, but I'm just going to tell you 3 things are going to happen. 1, you're going to learn to treat women as objects, somebody to do something to. 2, you're not going to get any of the beautiful part about sex, which is romance and emotional intimacy. And 3, you're going to think women like a lot of things that, trust me, they don't like. And I'm not getting into details with you on that.
I feel you. I feel you. I guess I look at this stuff as people are different. Like, for instance, there's some, what are those, fuzzies? Have you ever heard of these? The people who like to be in those bear costumes or these fuzzy costumes. And for whatever reason, they get sexually aroused with these fuzzy costumes and they rub their bodies in these costumes. And you're like, okay, I don't quite see it, but whatever. Fair enough. Or people who like stepping on cockroaches is like, oh, that woman stepping on that cockroach turns me on so much. People get in. Like I said, I think the problem with this is it's not so much the act. You can have people who are into femdom. You can have people who are into BDSM, and they get their jollies off having someone beat the hell out of them. Guys get their jollies off having a woman brutalize them viciously. You have some women who get off on having it. Now, the problem becomes, if I'm paying you for this, how do I know that you're just enjoying this? And versus, how do I know that you're doing this for a paycheck? Like, that's the part where I agree with you on, where it gets dicey. It's this woman is getting the hell beat out of her. This guy is getting the hell beat out of him. He's an actor. He's not necessarily doing this because he enjoys it. He's doing it because he just wants the paycheck. Oh man, I
don't agree with that distinction, because you could say that about a woman who is a victim of domestic abuse, right? who doesn't realize that, she'll say, oh, he hit me because I burned the dinner tonight, or, oh, he hit me because, and she'll blame herself, which is so often, so you could say she's staying in that situation willingly.
But can't you?
I mean, how could I don't get this bondage thing. I really don't. I mean,
but you don't have to. I guess that's what I'm getting at. Like, isn't this the argument that undermines agency of the person involved? Like, you have a female who, for whatever reason, she understands that, yes, I like this. Now, you may not understand why she like it. You may say to yourself, this sounds a little strange to me. You may say most women don't like to be tied up. Fair enough. But come on. There's going to be a percentage out there that, for whatever reason, enjoys it. And it's easy for somebody else looking on them saying, oh, that person is similar to domestic abuse and they don't understand they're being abused. Doesn't that undermine the agency of the woman involved in the process?
Well, again, I go back to Lily's quote, if you don't have options, you don't have choice. I mean, really, so much is psychological too. Why do you make the choices you make,
Yeah.
And I don't even presume to understand why somebody would like that. I'm sure people have researched it, but I'm too busy with other things to take time to study that research. But I'm sure the answer is out there, but it was an interesting digression nonetheless.
Yeah. I find this topic interesting. I've heard Chris Hedges talk about it. And, he used to be a minister. He used to be a preacher. And he can be like strong on this very specific point of pornography and so forth. I understand where you're coming from with the argument, though. Like, it's one of those things where I understand where you're coming from. I get the positioning of it, and I get where one would come from. Personally, I got to be honest, I enjoy a little BDSM. And the reason why I say that is it's fun. I mean, it's adult play. Now, if a person doesn't necessarily enjoy it, from their standpoint, they're like, oh my God. I give you a perfect example. I talked to this woman who there's a shop here in Virginia where you can buy like toys and that type of stuff. And she said, my boyfriend came home and my boyfriend had all of these whips and chains and he wanted to tie me up. And she said, after the first go round, she says, yes, I'm done. I'm done. I don't like this. This is not something that I'm getting a kick out of. And yeah, if this is what you're looking for, you've picked the wrong person. Now, I can respect that. Like, that's somebody who's saying, this is not what I'm looking for, and you're not going to push me into this. Are you going to have people who get pushed into it? Yes. Just by any percentage. Of course, you're going to have some people who get pushed into it because they don't necessarily want to leave their boyfriend, or maybe they feel like they're stuck with the boyfriend, or maybe for whatever reason.
You know what? Stay away from the fetishes, because those are extreme cases. Let's just talk about what sex is like for young people now. What you really need to do is start listening to young girls in middle school. And what they're saying, there's a website called Fight the New Drug, and it has nothing to do with any religious group. And they're talking to kids, and kids are saying they don't want to feel like they're going to parties and blowjob parties. That's a big thing in school. The other thing is guys are telling them, I want to come on your face. They don't want that,
Yeah.
They feel like, again, this is the problem. This is how they're getting their sex education. So I went to this talk by this guy from Fight the New Drug, who's actually a therapist who had a pornography addiction thing. And he's literally telling, because this session was geared to the teenagers in the room. He's literally saying, I never saw, my parents hug and kiss. I never saw them be affectionate to each other. So with my wife, we sit on the couch, we hold hands. I run my fingers through her hair. I mean, I do these kinds of things. And when you're in a movie, say to your date, may I kiss you? What's wrong with any of this stuff? Because the more safe the person feels, the better the intimacy.
Yeah.
And these are the types of discussions we have to be having with kids, probably starting in middle school. So this is what Gail feels like. She came out here a couple of weeks ago. She spoke to 15 schools about this curriculum that she's developed. And I think just like we try to teach critical thinking, although not so much in the charter schools, we try to teach critical thinking. We try to teach media literacy. I mean, both of my sons took classes. One was called Gender in the Media, and the other, and this was in high school.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it was private school.
Well, you're in California, so we have.
That's what we need that's what we need to be teaching right now. And then I think, because like I'm a person that I don't believe in censorship. I remember in 1978, I was still in college. It was the year that the Nazis wanted to march in Skokie, and people were saying they shouldn't be allowed to march. There's a lot of Holocaust survivors that live here. And I remember, siding with the ACLU, that they have the right. That's their free speech right. It's like your thing with Milo,
Agreed. Yeah. Let him speak. Don't create more of an issue by trying to stop him. Let him speak. If he wants to find a bunch of idiots to listen to him, let him, I don't like this censorship stuff. I don't like it.
The antidote to bad speech is good speech.
Yes.
So what you do is you hold a counter rally, Now, people have told me, and, I'm not going to tell them they're wrong, but people have told me that his speech could be construed as non-protected speech when you think that what he was doing was he was outing trans people. And then they were getting beaten up. So in the sense that he was doing that, he was inciting violence. And that is not a protected form of speech.
Correct.
So I don't know. I didn't independently verify whether he was actually doing that, but I thought that was an interesting case to be made.
Yeah, that's fair. And that's a fair point. It's like yeah, but I don't know if Milo, okay, yeah, that's true. If he's inciting violence, fair enough. Like you can't go into a theater and scream fire. My concern with all this stuff is it's such a slippery slope where you start shutting down the ability of people to be able to speak. I don't have to like what the people are saying. There's a lot of stuff that people say that I greatly dislike. Do I want to shut them up? Not really. Do I need to listen to them? No, I don't. And at some point, that scale is going to be used. It's going to be a sliding scale. It's in the same way. Like I give an example. One of the guys was going after Caitlin Johnston, and the guy was I think it was for Mother Jones. Mother Jones is spitting in her grave right now. I swear to God, she is.
Oh yeah.
And he's attacking Caitlin Johnston, saying that Medium needs to get rid of those type of articles. Caitlin Johnston hasn't said anything that was offensive, that was overtly off, or anything else. And yet, Mother Jones, for whatever reason, one of the senior editors believes that he needs to attack one of the lefty writers. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's absolutely amazing. Okay, Lauren, thank you very much for coming on. You've been an awesome guest. I love talking to you. I find this stuff to be absolutely fascinating. You've been doing this for so long. You've been in all of these different areas, and you've been scoring these amazing interviews and not shying away from asking the questions that I would ask if I had the opportunity to ask those questions. So thank you very much. You're awesome. I go back to that Cenk Uygur interview because I love that interview, because people ask this question about the $20 million. And they say, because I think the logic works. The logic is sound. What you're asking was perfectly sound, and it made perfect sense. If you're saying that political leaders and politicians are somehow tainted by the money that they take, which I agree with. I think they're being bribed. When you have the guy talking about called Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, and told him shut up about class. Well, that's directly saying, I am giving you money, and if you continue to speak about class, I am going to stop giving you money. That's a bribe. That's an open bribe. So I agree with it. Now, the question, it gets a little more dicey, though, and the question becomes, okay, if you agree with that, and if that is the logic of TYT, I understand you guys want to expand your media company. I don't fault you with that at all. It is what it is. You guys are a company. You want to expand the company. But if you're also getting $20 million now in the same way that those political leaders got $20 million, does that also mean that you're tainted in the same way that you're saying that those political leaders are tainted?
Mm-hmm.
They hate that question. They absolutely hate that question, because I think for them, they look at it as, what do you mean we're tainted? But what they miss is that political leader is looking at that question in the exact same way. Like when Jimmy Dore is making this case of saying, like, well, no, it's Cenk. He's not, if he's just taking a position, Cenk is just wrong. But Jimmy Dore is close to Cenk. And TYT has changed. Like, you can look at what TYT was during the primaries and everything else. They seem to be different.
Well, I want to tell you a story about TYT and one of their advertisers that I did a live stream about, and it got corrected.
Go for it.
They have an advertiser named Aspiration, and they're supposed to be a socially conscious investment company, which I think is an oxymoron. But anyway. So I've been very involved with the movement to start a public bank here in Los Angeles.
Oh, cool. Okay.
The public bank movement has been energized recently because of the Divest LA movement, which is trying to get the city of LA to divest from Wells Fargo, which we have started doing. So they had a big rally at City Hall in which they spelled out, divest in the ground and people were shooting it from above. And TYT went and covered it. Two people that I know, Taylor Gill and Michelle Booley, went and covered it, and they thought they were doing like a news story. And they interviewed Phoenix Goodman, who is one of the lead organizers of both movements, Divest LA and Public Bank. And he was talking about how we have to get out of this horrible bank, Wells Fargo, and the ultimate solution is to have our own city-owned bank.
Yeah.
Cut out, when they ended this thing, they cut out the ultimate solution is a public bank. And the entire time they had this piece running, for the short amount of time they had it running, it had the aspiration logo, as if he was promoting this
aspirations, yeah,
financial institution. And I found out about it because I'm on TYT's email list, and I saw the link. I didn't even have to go to the Young Turks. I could just click on the play button in my email and watch this thing, and I'm like, oh my God. And so I immediately sent it to Phoenix, and I said, are you upset about this, that your thing is being turned into a commercial for aspiration? And he said, it's even worse than what you know. And he told me the part about how we cut out the public bank.
Wow.
Right when he said that.
Oh, wow.
So because I did the live stream already, and I said, do you want me to try to spread this and make this go wider? And he said, no. Let me see if we can turn this into an opportunity. So what they decided to do was contact Cenk and see if they could get him to A, pull the video, and B, come on his show and talk about the public bank. And to his credit, he did both.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. Yeah, very nice. Whatever people want to say of Cenk, my perspective of him has always been, whatever you want to believe, I think he wants money out of politics. Like you might say everything else is a crapshoot, but at the very least, it's like Elizabeth Warren. I believe Elizabeth Warren, whatever you want to say about Warren, hates bankers. Yeah. So I can trust her on banks. I think she would maul a banker if she had the opportunity and she could get away with it. And on this one, Cenk Uygur has been somewhat consistent on this thing of money out of politics.
Yeah.
So that's amazing. Wow. Yeah.
And and your viewers heard it first. No, actually my viewers did, but I only had like 12 at the time. No. I had about 700 subscribers, but I didn't even put that one on YouTube. I just did that on Facebook Live. But now I'm putting everything on YouTube, So for people who are watching, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's Lauren from LA.
I am going to put that at the bottom so they can see it. And like I said, I've done multiple stories that you've covered, like either the Cenk Uygur thing where you had the conversation with Cenk, or even, I think it was two others. It was the Dore interview, and it was the Truth Out article for the booing. Because I thought all those were absolutely awesome. I love the interview with Dore. I love it. There was there's a part in this. Oh, and I'm sorry, I'm keeping you for too long. There's an interview where you did with Dore, and you asked Dore a question. You said, so I heard that you were off the main show. And Dore says, no, that was a rumor. And somebody made it. And I watched that. I thought to myself, okay, fair enough. I heard that rumor. I even kind of talked about, is Dore leaving the show? That type of thing. And somebody sent me a clip and said, hey, Dore said this to Lauren, but this sounds like a little bit different than what he was actually saying here on this very specific clip. And in the clip, he kind of made this point of, they didn't want him on the show for the State of the Union address. And I think that's where people jumped the shark for that. I think they heard, they don't want me on the show for the State of the Union address, and took that to mean they didn't want me on the show. Either way, my point was that rumor came from you, buddy. That rumor came from you. I love Dore. Dore is fucking awesome. He's been
great. I have to tell you, that's the second time he's come to my home for a fundraiser. It was nice. The first one was a fundraiser for the medics of Standing Rock. Yeah. And we raised about $6,500. And this one was a fundraiser for Ankur Patel, who is running for state assembly. And he's got a great chance. He's a Bernie-crat. He's got a great chance because the incumbent was forced to resign because of sexual harassment charges. Yeah. He actually cornered, this wasn't in doing his course of doing business. This was actually at a bachelor party for another politician in Las Vegas. He locked this woman into a bathroom and masturbated in front of her.
Oh, that's so gross.
Why you guys think that's a turn on?
I don't know why people think that's sexy. Harvard Weinstein, when there was one of the stories was that he blocked the door when the woman wouldn't have sex with him and masturbated in a plant. And you're like, oh, why are you doing this to the plant and that poor woman? Like, how? That's so bizarre to me. Like you're standing there with this woman who's shocked and in utter terror, scornful of you, and you have your penis out. And not only that, it's aroused. And you're like, how are you holding on? I find that to be amazing. I'm always, whenever I hear stories like this, I always think to myself, it's hard enough to get a hard on. And she's looking at you and she's hating what's taking place. And you're still aroused in this process. And you continue. And it's like, why are you doing this?
Domination. That's the subjugation. That's the patriarchy part of it all.
So gross.
Because it has nothing to do with sex. It has to do with power.
With power, yeah. And you know what? I've joked about this, but I'm also serious about this. Going topless, women going topless. Like that is literally the state itself putting its hands on women's bodies or controlling women's bodies. Men can go topless, but women can't. Now, that seems small, but it's when you're talking about like breastfeeding and people taking issue with women breastfeeding, it's like, but men can walk around with no shirt on. Why can't women? This seems like really unfair in the way that society is structured. Like, it seems like there's a patriarchy that takes a perspective of one, but thinks the other is okay. And I don't see why one is okay more than the other. I know that's a detour, but I've always thought that was weird that one is allowed, but the other is not. Okay, wow, that's amazing. I find that to be amazing. Though, so he has a chance. I look, Dore is easily one of my favorite people on YouTube. When he was taking so much heat when he came out early on, like it's one thing for people coming out after the election against Hillary and everything else. Dore was taking a lion's share of the heat for taking that position of I am not falling in line on this. And man, did he take a hit. Like a massive amount of heat. You can even see the friction that was taking place between him and the show itself. And nevertheless, he still stayed the course and he still stuck to his guns. And I would say that he is probably one of the most beloved figures on the left because of it. Yeah. I don't think it was easy, but he's earned it.
There is one thing that he said in that conversation that I had with him that I disagreed, but I didn't want to be disagreeable with the guest of honor at my thing. And that's where he was saying that the Democrats are no different from the Republicans, that Trump is no different from everything that's gone on before, and it's all neoliberalism. Right. I'm against neoliberalism as he is. But what's happening right now with Trump is definitely a program of the right wing. I don't think there are two things that I've had to eat crow about when it comes to Hillary, because I was one of those people that said there would be no difference between Trump and Hillary. And we have already talked about the ways, whether it's war in Syria, she'd probably get us out of the Iran deal too. But there are two things that I know pretty much for a fact that Hillary would not be doing. One is the intentional dismantling of all the agencies.
Yes.
The way that Trump's agency heads are doing it.
Agreed.
And two is the appointment of right-wing judges for life. These are judges that are not approved by the American Bar Association. The right wing has put aside the American Bar Association. They're only using the American Federalist Society, which is an extremely right-wing, conservative, libertarian organization that has vetted these judges, and these judges are completely unqualified, but they want to undo decades of jurisprudence. And he is getting these people approved at a faster rate than any other president ever has.
Yeah, that part I agree with you on.
And Obama tried, although what he should have gone much more hardline with Merrick Garland. He should have appointed him during recess by executive appointment. He was a wuss about that, just like he was a wuss about so many things. And the American people are paying the price of it. So I would disagree with
Dore. On that one. I agree with you with the Garland thing. He should have been they stole his president, and like they stole his Supreme Court's picks. Like honestly, that's literally what it boils down to. They stole it. I would have installed Merrick Garland, and I would have said, take me to court over it and get him removed. Yeah. Like it's like, prove it. What you guys are doing is fundamentally legal. Essentially doing this thing where you have this kind of rolling, pretending as if Congress is open 24/7 in perpetuity, whatever. Yeah, he should have installed Merrick Garland. If they wanted to take him to court to have him removed, do so.
Yeah.
Do so. I don't like, he wussed out big time about this, acting, it was like, I can't do anything and blah, whatever. You're the president of the United States. I'm pretty sure you can find, it's like for the energy that you put into trying to pass the Trans-Pacific Partnership, you should have put that energy into getting Merrick Garland on that bench. So I agree with you on this. And yeah, I agree with you on that part too. But so my feeling was there were going to be differences between the two, but the differences were going to be minor, and it depended on what those differences were. Yeah, they've jumped the shark on this whole jurisprudence thing. They don't care about the judge. They just want somebody in that slot that'll do a particular bidding and that they're running with it. And yeah, he put cartoon characters, comic book cartoon characters, inside of those different organizations, like putting Pruitt in the EPA is a joke. Like that's like this just rank irony in the way that he's going about it. Putting DeVos in as education director. And what's sad about that, they're dragging her before Congress because she's talking about a plan to revitalize or revent schools, completely revamping it, lying to Congress about it. And they're dragging her before Congress saying, you lied to us and you're trying to do something that we didn't tell you that you have the ability to do. So I agree with you on that part. I guess my feeling is we're over a barrel, meaning the left. And from the environmental part alone, even if you take off the social impact, the environmental impact alone, we're talking about a catastrophe. That doesn't even get into our war policy and all this other stuff. And something needs to fundamentally change before we hit a cliff. In fact, I looked at it as if we're continuously going the way that we're going, like this kind of one Democrat after the next in perpetuity, using the same rule set of that guy is a maniac, so you need to vote for me regardless of what that I do, regardless of what I do. It just feels like it lurches on in perpetuity without change. It feels like there was going to be a consequence regardless of what took place in order for something to change. But I agree with you, though. That's horrible.
To bring it around to your original question, I really do not trust the Democratic Party. I don't even, I vote. I mean, it's the very minimum of what I can do. Yeah. But I really feel that people need to do more than just voting. I think they need to be part of social movements and not just go to a protest or sign a petition and feel they've done something. I think we need to do organizing. We need to talk to our neighbors, our friends, our family members, even the apolitical ones, especially the apolitical ones. We're doing too much, preaching to the choir and talking to each other. And when you get down to values, as I did when I was on a plane ride, a 5.5-hour plane ride from LA to Raleigh, North Carolina last year, sitting next to a right-wing religious conservative Ted Cruz supporter.
Oh, geez.
Very little that we disagreed on when we took the labels off of it.
Yeah.
And I even educated him about something that he was surprised to have to agree with me about, which was that the banks, they like to blame it on government, right? Mm-hmm. And we like to blame it on corporations. So he was a salesperson for I forget what the product was that he sold, but he was a sales manager. And I was saying that corporations, now that they're a private corporation, they're public corporations, like even Goldman Sachs. I read that when Goldman Sachs was a partnership, before it went public, they had a real sense of responsibility to what they were trying to do, which is investment banking, which is to find the money so somebody can start a business and employ people and do all this stuff, right? But that's not what corporations are doing with their money now. They're buying back their own stock to inflate their stock prices because of the fact that the CEO compensation is based on quarterly earnings. And they pay more money in their salaries. They pay more taxes on their salaries than they do on their deferred stock options. So it's better for them to get the stock price up. Options, right. And so the corporations are incentivized by tax policy not to build factories and hire workers and improve people's lives. And that's a big thing that Bernie doesn't talk about. Matt Stoller does a lot of work on monopolization, which we could do a whole show about, the concentration, where there's only 5 companies in media, 5 companies in food, 5 companies in airlines. When you have monopolization, you don't have choice. The worker can't say, I'm going to go there. If you don't pay me enough, I'm going to go to your competitor and get another job, a better job, if there is no competitor. Same thing with the consumer. They can't say, I'm going to buy it elsewhere because there's no elsewhere. Yeah. And so monopolization is a big problem. But what I was talking to this guy about was I was telling him this, and he was like, oh, yeah, that's why my boss would always ask me to book the sales that weren't coming due until the next quarter into the existing quarter. So it was like amazing.
Wrong. It's like, oh, I know what you're talking about. I think those people are reachable. I haven't, but you can't be a hypocrite. Like I don't think you can reach them if you're not earnest. Like when somebody is sick, for example, Donald Trump decides I'm going to go to North Korea to talk to Kim Jong-un. that may be fruitless. It may be a failure, but at the very least, good job in trying to, at the very least, pretending like you want peace, like pretending like you're trying to have some kind of detente, some kind of coming together. Rachel Maddow hits him on this. Did you see that? She hits him on this. She's like, oh, this is insanity. This is lunacy. This is crazy talk. And then you go back and you see the clip of Obama in the debate saying the exact same thing.
Right. I mean, my last show was on Korea with John Matthew Loritz.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I was a history major and I studied a lot of revolutions, I knew very little about Korean history. And this is a history lesson, this show. It's 49 minutes of him talking about from 1905, when Japan occupied Korea, how the first Kim Il-sung, the grandfather, was the freedom fighter. He was trying to liberate his people and form a communist society. But it wasn't Russian communism, just like Ho Chi Minh was not a Russian communist, just like, you know.
They're their own thing. Yeah. It's like, it's they're different governments. I mean, even in capitalist countries, you have different ways in the way they organize their governments. It's not just, you know, one communist country.
And we propped up these militaristic dictatorships in South Korea for 3 decades. We boosted up their economic miracle. Everybody talks about, oh, South Korea and Samsung and all this shit. We did tariffs. We did subsidies. We did financial aid. I mean, you got to watch the show. I learned so much from my own show that I didn't know.
I love that. I love that. I am a history buff like nobody's business. It was funny. I was sitting here writing down that story to check the show out. Yeah. You learn so much from like some of the lectures that these guys have. They're fascinating when you get into American history or either history from abroad. There's a show that gives like 1,000 years of British history, and you're like, 1,000 years of history? That's amazing. Like when you start like how far back that stuff goes. Yeah. I am going to check out your show on the North Korea thing. I've done a few on North Korea, but I focus more so on the Korean War and their perspective of us, and trying to get this point across that we look at these things purely from the American perspective, and not necessarily that other countries have actual ideas and perspectives. Like with Vietnam, you know, Vietnam goes in this thing of being controlled and dominated by France, this kind of brutal rule by France. And the United States comes in, and they think that the United States is just going to be another repressive regime, just like France was. And they look at the extra bonus. If this is what a liberal democracy is like, I don't want to be a liberal democracy. Like the example that they took was from us and their abusers, the people who were invading their country. That was the example they took that pushed them in the opposite direction. Now the United States looks at this and says, these guys are going to be commies, and we need to invade this country. We need to put some kind of strongman in this country or prop up this particular regime. There's a conversation between McNamara and Ho Chi Minh, and it takes place like 20, 30 years after the war. And Ho Chi Minh explains to McNamara, no, you guys were going to be foreign conquerors just like the French. And McNamara is like, no, that's not what we were intending at all. And these guys are there like yelling at each other. You know, it's like 1 million people died in that war. It's like, yes, 1 million people died in that war. You guys should have had a conversation, or at the very least should have tried to understand the Vietnamese position, as opposed to just invading the country and blowing the country to bits.
Well, did you know that Ho Chi Minh actually came to Washington to try to meet with Roosevelt, and Roosevelt wouldn't meet with him?
Wow, I did not know that. Yeah. I did not know that. That's amazing. I mean, that's wait. It was that Wilson. Are you sure that wasn't Wilson? Woodrow Wilson, during the war itself, when they were talking about they were having all those world leaders. Maybe I'm mistaking what I'm thinking of. But there was a point where they had all of these world leaders that went to Europe to have this kind of talk after the war. They were repositioning the world or reorganizing the world affairs. And if I am not mistaken, there was a young Ho Chi Minh that came to the delegation. But all these guys were virulent racists. Like Wilson himself was a racist and didn't necessarily want to meet or see these guys as equals. So they didn't necessarily take the meeting. I am fascinated by the historical context that this stuff takes in. And the fact is, people get led astray when they look at this stuff from like a 2-year historical context. It's almost like Chuck Todd is Mr. Oblivious. I always call him Mr. Oblivious because it seems like Chuck Todd only has like a year of history or historical context of whatever he's talking about.
But he loves his maps, though, right?
Right. He loves his maps. Lord, thank you for coming on. I've had you here for like 2 hours, and I would have you here for longer. I usually have to have this thing in my head saying, "Don't do that." I had Joe Firestone on here for like 4 hours. I think it was like a 4-hour show. He's a PhD in what is it? In not economics, PhD in history, I believe, political science. fascinating guy when he gets into like the little political details of that stuff, and he's just drag him in, talking forever. So thank you.
You'll have to come on my show next.
Anytime you want me to come on, I am open to come on. I would enjoy it.
All right, great. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk.
No, thank you for coming on. I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate it a lot. Keep kicking ass. Keep kicking ass. I always say that woman is a pit bull.
Thank
all right,
you.
guys. I am going to end this here. Guys, thank you all for showing up. Like I always say, if you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, write, subscribe, and of course, you can always support through Patreon. And everyone who's giving super cash, thank you very much. You guys are appreciated. All right.